Okay, for video 3 we're going to do something a little different. We're just going to explore some texturing and lighting in a different scene, and but my project is still set to here because I need it to be set somewhere so I can store some textures here in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new scene. I'm going to File, New Scene. I'm not going to save the changes I made, but you probably should. Okay, so I'm going to create just a couple of random objects, and you can sort of do the same too. So I have let's do that, and I can get rid of my box. Just kind of setting these up where I can see all of them. And then I'm going to create a plane, polygon plane, and scale that up, just because that's just another object for us to kind of use and be able to see. And then I'm just going to hide my grid just so I don't have to look at it during this. So I'm just going to click this little button here and it's going to get rid of the grid. We'll be able to see our objects here. So again, a polyplane, a sphere, I have a cylinder, and a cone. Okay. Now, the thing you'll notice is that they're all sort of the same. They all have the same color on them. They're all gray, right? And as we talked about earlier with the attribute editor, we can see the different nodes that go into making these objects, right? And we can change things about those nodes from in here, right? I want to go up here to the very top, and I'm just going to click this little arrow until I get to the very end. And you're going to see that there's a Lambert 1 material. And that's a type of material that is going to not have any reflections or specular highlights. Okay, and so I have my sphere here. I want to change my sphere's color. I can grab it and I can go out here to Lambert 1 and I can click this color, or I could drag this slider, and the thing you're going to notice that happens is I'm actually changing the color of all of my objects. Now, why am I doing that? Why is that happening? So let's look at this. Again, all of these things here are nodes that are mapped in to this object, okay, including the material. So the material is this thing that stands on its own outside of all of this. It's not an attribute of this, or it's not a feature of this object, right? It's a separate thing that is put onto this object. And so it's actually on all of these objects, and Lambert 1 is sort of the default material that comes with Maya when you create a new scene. So let's go ahead and open up our Hypershade and look at where the materials live. If I click this button here, it's the little blue circle with the white dot in it. It's going to open up my Hypershade. I'm going to pull it over here to this window just so we can see it a little bit better. And mine looks like this. I'm missing a feature that I kind of like over here, which is if I go to Windows, it's my property editor. And so I can just click that and just drag it in here and sort of place it. And so now I can see the properties of these. Come on. As well. Sorry. There we go. And I can resize that. Okay, so what we'll notice in here, looking at this, is that we have several things. We have this list of materials in here, right? And we see our Lambert 1. We also see this particle cloud 1 and this shader glow 1. All of those are just the default materials that Maya creates, but any new object you create is going to get the Lambert 1 material on it. So to create a new material, I can just click one of these. Sorry. I can create one of these buttons here, right, and that's going to give us a new material to use. So some of the basic ones that we can look at is like a blend, or an anisotropic, or Fong-E. Let's do a blend. So I click on blend, and you'll see that I get this new material up here, blend 1. And there's a couple of differences between a Lambert and a blend. So in Lambert, you'll see we have the option to change our object's colors, right? We also have the option to change the transparency, make it opaque, right? We got this ambient color, which makes it look like it kind of glows, and incandescence, kind of the same thing, or not the same thing, but a similar thing. We're going to skip over bump mapping. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the Lambert, once we get down here, like that's really its thing. It doesn't really have highlights, right? However, I can go back to Blend, and Blend has a whole separate section on top of all of that right here that says Specular Shading. Okay, so in Specular Shading, you can see that I have this highlight, right? And this highlight is sort of the gloss on an object, right? So let's apply this to our sphere and just kind of look at some of the results of that. So a couple of ways I can do that. I can middle click and drag that and drop it on my sphere. You'll see that it applies that material. Or I can select my sphere and I can right click on the material and say assign material to selection. And so either way we'll put that on there, and then I can just go and close down my Hypershade because I can get to the material still yet, or the material settings still yet from my attribute editor. All right, so let's focus in on this. I'm going to give it a color. Let's just pick pick this little square here, and I'm just going to find sort of a purplish color. There we go. Maybe lighten that up a little bit. Okay, now when we play around with this specular lighting, watch what happens when I take this eccentricity a little lower. That highlight gets sharper, right? We can see it there. It gets really, really small, right? Versus when I take it out, it gets really soft and bright. So let's think about what that means. Like when this gets larger, we're getting more of a diffusion of that specular highlight. Think of a rough surface, like a painted wall or something, right? When light hits it, you can get some highlights on it, but it's going to kind of spread those out. And it's because the light's hitting it, kind of bouncing around on it before it bounces off. However, something that's going to be super shiny, like a bowling ball or something like that, we're going to start getting these really sharp highlights. It's really glossy and usually really hard. Right, and the light will just bounce right off of it, and we'll get these really sharp, crisp highlights. Specular roll-off is kind of the brightness of that. How much does that bump off? And then the third thing we're going to notice is reflectivity. And right now, reflectivity is set at 0.5, but even though we're seeing this highlight, we're not really seeing anything reflecting in our object. Okay, so let's try rendering this, because right now what we're seeing is the viewport render, and this is very similar to a really simple game engine, right? It's rendering it as fast as it can. But if I hit the render button here, and it's this little clapboard, the white one, not the one with the other images on it. If I click that, it's going to pop up a render in here. Now in this render we get this ball, and it's looking better. We get the highlights, and the render looks better than what we have in our viewport. So it's jaggy. It's got a little bit nicer lighting on it. This highlight's crisper. And so you'll also notice that this render took 1 second to render. Right? If I hit it again, you'll see it takes a second and then it renders. Right? So our render time is different than what we have in our viewport here, because our viewport is rendering as fast as it can. It's rendering in real time. Right? It's rendering at least 24 to 30 frames a second. This is taking a whole second just to render 1 frame. So we do that because it's kind of compiling it together. It's kind of baking it down into one final pretty image. Now it's doing that through the software, whereas this is running it through the graphics card, the GPU, right? And so there's a software application that's kind of inside of Maya called Maya Software Renderer. But it's not the only renderer. Okay, another one we can look at. There's actually a whole list of them here, and the one we're going to choose is Mental Ray. Okay, now if you don't have Mental Ray, that's because that plugin didn't load. Mental Ray is a plugin. Let me show you how to load that. You go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you're going to look for, scroll down, it's going to be maya2mr.mll, and if it's unchecked, you just got to check it and it'll come on. So we're going to choose Mental Ray. I'm going to click this button to sort of temporarily save this image just so we can go back and look at it, and I'm going to hit render again. Okay, so now you see a little bit of a difference between those two renders, right? I mean, I moved my camera a little bit on them, but you'll see the other differences too, which is the lighting quality is a little bit better, the overall quality is a little bit better, and we're getting reflections in here. So even though we had reflectivity on in my software, it wasn't actually reflecting. We could make it do it, but Mental Ray just overall is a better renderer. And it's not the only one. There's also one called RenderMan that was written by Pixar. There's a whole bunch of different ones, and we have some other options in here too, but right now Mental Ray is going to give us one of the best results. So I'm going to minimize that. Oh goodness. That's great. So this is what our emergency system looks like at ETSU if there's ever actually a real emergency. Let's go ahead and click that and get that out of our screen, so I apologize for that. Okay, so we've made that render. The thing that we can do now is we can go back and change that reflectivity and turn it down a little bit, and I could take it down to like 0.01 or 0.1. And now when let's save that and render it again, you'll see that it's slightly duller of a reflection. So we can control that a little bit, right? So let's move on. Let's put some materials on something else. Let's put something on this floor. Okay, so I'm gonna apply a new material to this, and so to do that, I could go back to my Hypershade, or I could just right-click on the object and say assign new material, and this will create a new material and assign it to this object. So I'm just going to choose let's do a blend, okay, again, and so now again I could change this color for the floor for whatever I wanted it to. This is a new material that's mapped into just the floor. I could make it red or whatever, right? But you'll notice that at the end of each of these is a little checkerboard pattern, right? And on that little checkerboard pattern, I can click it, right? So when I do that, it pops up this. Okay, it's going to create a render node. So basically what I'm saying is, instead of rendering it with a solid color, I want to render it, or I want to texture it with one of these options here. Okay, so Maya has a whole bunch of procedural options. Right? We could use water or ocean or noise, Mandelbrot, which is like a fractal image. There's an actual fractal. A checkerboard, bulge, a cloth pattern, which is sort of like this textured thing. I'm going to do checker for right now. Let's look at what that does. When I click checker, well, I don't see anything. I can see a checkerboard over here, and in fact, if I just select the ground plane again and look at the blend, you can see a checkerboard on that, but for some reason I don't see it on the floor. Why is that? So that goes back to what we learned in video 1, which is if you if you hit 4, we're going to see this in wireframe. If we hit 5, we're going to see this in shaded. Okay? We have to hit 6 before we see the textures come up. Okay, and then 7 is lit, but currently we don't have any lights in here. Okay, so 6, and we can see the textures. And what we need to realize, click this little button to go back to that texture, is that this is not an image that is found somewhere on our computer. This is Maya generating this texture mathematically. Right? And so I can change the color of this. I can click on it. I can make one section blue and one section green or something. If I wanted to, like whatever patterns we want to do here. Let's try to get something that's not quite so abrasive. How about, or maybe even more abrasive. And then make this a little bit more like, there we go. I don't know, just playing around with some colors. Right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and render this. And you'll see that this too has a little bit of reflection on the floor here, right? Because we used that blend. And if we wanted it to be more reflective, we could turn that up or down, right? Okay. So, next thing we're going to talk about is adding another texture on here. So again, I'm going to assign a new material to this. Right, I'm going to choose, this time I'm going to choose Lambert. I don't need this thing to have any highlights or reflections, okay? Because we're going to put sort of a rougher texture on here. So if I click here, it's going to bring my Create Render node up again. And the one thing you'll notice is there's about the fourth one down, there's one called File. And if I click that, that's going to allow me to choose my own image that I can use. So let's say you're out and about, you're a photographer, you take a picture of a rusty wall, and you want to apply that rusty wall to this object. So that's the safest way to get your textures because you own the copyright to that image. Okay. Now, if you don't have the ability to take those pictures or whatever, there are some resources out there for free that will allow you to use textures that they provide. And so one of the ones I notice a lot is textures.com. And so let's look at that. And let's just search for rust. See what we can find in here. There we go. We're getting all sorts of rusty images. Look at that. So let's find something like kind of evenly distributed rusty. Let's do, oh wow, thought this was going to be easier. Let's do this guy. He's an interesting one, right? Let's click on it. It's going to take me to some options. I kind of want to, actually let's go back and see if we can find a square one. Because I want it to evenly distribute. Let's do maybe something, oh no, let's try this. This is interesting. And so I'm just going to use one of these, the seamless, like small textures. Is this one seamless? Yeah. And so I'll click on this one. Now this one's free. I can use the smallest version of this for free, or I can buy some credits or something to get the larger ones. But these are free to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that. And you have to sign up for this account to do this. But let's go to put this where, let me move this over here where I can find my file. Okay, yeah, so we're back here now. GM faculty, this is where I just have my stuff stored up on a network. I'm just going to projects, and under the bridge folder, I'm just going to, this is where I still have my project set, so I'm going to put it in my source images folder. Again, if we don't have a project set, and we just saved this anywhere, then Maya's never going to be able to find that file again. It's, you know, we have to put it where we want it, and that's in the bridges, or the bridge folder, and I put it in source images just because that's where Maya is going to default. So I'm going to go to save, and it's metal floors rusted. Hit save. Right. So now if I click this file button, let's go back here actually. What I did is I clicked the checkerboard, it popped up our options went menu, and I'm just going to click file, and then I'm going to click my little folder to go find that file, and it's metal floors rusted. Right. When I hit open, alright, there it is, it put it on there, right? Now that's not necessarily how I want it to look, but it's working. I can increase the number of times this texture repeats by, if I click out here and go into here, you have my file, but now this is the place 2D texture. I can repeat the number of times under repeat UV, and I can do like 10 and 10. That's probably too much. Let's do like 5 and 5. Right, now we have this texture on here. And you'll see that when I render, that texture is on there. That's too much. I just have to change that. Let's do more like 2 and 2. Yeah, that looks better, I guess. So the reason this isn't looking the best in the world is because of how our model is laid out. Like we got this seam down here where the texture wraps, but think about this. It's like trying to wrap wrapping paper around a basketball, right? We have this 3D shape. How do I take a 2D image and wrap that around it? And so we'll get into this more later, but under Windows UV Editor, you'll be able to see that this is how Maya thinks of our 3D object being unwrapped on this texture, right? It's got the two caps for the cylinder, and then this is the part in the middle. And that's not really a great way of unwrapping it. And so we can make some changes to that and sort of scale that out. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the future, just of ways of making this texture look better. Right? But know that we do have the ability to do that. We do have the ability to make changes to how this texture wraps around this object. I just don't want to get into that too much just yet. But it's the UVs is what we would use to change the way that texture wraps around our object. Okay. So, two more quick things we're going to look at. I showed earlier that we can change the transparency of objects, right? I can make this translucent, and when we would render this, then ideally it would kind of look like it's translucent. Right? I'm going to undo that. I'm going to apply a new material to this. Assign new material. I'm going to go ahead and do a Lambert. Okay, and I'm going to make this. Again, I could make it translucent, but instead of just making it all translucent or transparent or not, I'm going to click this little button out here, because we can also apply materials to this translucency, right? So I could apply, a texture to this. I could try the bulge, right? And what you'll see is it uses this texture to make part of it transparent and part of it not, right? And I can change information about that. I could go to my place 2D texture and repeat that like 20 and 20, and you get the idea. We're getting these little like transparent holes in our cylinder, right? And so it's basically using black and white to decide what you can and can't see. So black on this this grid that we've made is visible, and white is invisible, which is actually kind of weird and backwards to me, but just know that that's how it's working. Let's say I wanted something else in there. I don't like that. I wanted to try something different. If I can right-click on transparency, the word, I can do break connection, and it'll break that, and now we can go map something else in. Maybe we would want to try, let's try cloud. So you can see we just get a very faint transparency here, and I can really crank that up a little higher if I wanted to get more contrast, more amplitude, and so we can make it look like part of it's dissolving, like Marty McFly's parents in that picture. And so we get like this little cloudy look to it, right? All of these options have things that we could map into them. If we wanted to change, like only have certain parts of our object be shiny, we can map it into the specularity, right? Sorry, I'm just going to delete that. That was, just kind of ignore what that was. That was from one of the other materials we put on there. I think that bulge thing was a 3D texture. Okay, so I want to show you one last thing in texturing. So if I go to my blend here, we kind of skipped over one earlier. We skipped over this bump mapping on our ball, right? Now let's talk about, let's look at that and see what that does to us. So if we can't really type. I mean, I could type in Greg, nothing really happens there, right? It's looking for a specific map, because we can't really slide the bump up and down because of how it works. So I'm going to click this checkerboard, and I'm just going to point to a fractal. Okay, let's see what happens when I do that. There we go. So it looks kind of at first like I've just put another texture on it, like we did with this, right? But that's not actually what's happening, because if you look, like if we focus like right here where the shadow is, right? Focus there. As I tumble around it, you'll see that shadow actually disappears, and we start seeing light under there again. The lighting is changing on this. So what's actually happening is Maya has put a map on here that's made it look like it's lumpy, right? It's made it look like it has all of this little fine detail in it, but we see from the model that it doesn't. It's still just those faces, right? You can still grab those faces and move them around, and it changes, right? What is actually happening here is Maya is putting a map on here that changes the way the light bounces off of it. And so it bounces off of it as if it had all that detail in it. It's very similar to normal mapping in games. Now I can go to Blend, and I can click this button again, and I can change attributes of this, right? But what I really want to change is how much it's bumpy, right? And so if I click this button here, that'll sort of take me back half a step. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to do it while I'm in my fractal one. Click this little button. And it'll take us back half a step to get to this bump depth, and I can adjust that, right? And I can make it just sort of slightly bumpy. Right. Now, let me show you another way of getting to that, because you may have asked yourself earlier, why do we even need the Hypershade? It doesn't seem like we use it. We just select and assign a new material this way, right? The Hypershade, because the way these materials work, they can get kind of confusing and deep on how many things are connected. And so I'm going to click on the Hypershade again. Let's open it up. Let's select our blend, and I'm going to right-click and say Graph Network. And what you're going to see is we get this graph of the different elements in here that make up our network. So we get our blend, get this bump 2D1, we have the fractal, and you can see that these little things pop up. So this is a quick way to get to that bump depth as well, if we want to change it just a little bit, right? And we can actually manually change the way this works as well. If I wanted that bump 2D to go into something else, I could. I don't right now though, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone, close that down. So here are the textures on our object. Last couple things we're going to look at is creating a couple of lights in here, because right now if I render, it looks like it's lit, right? We can see everything, but there's not actually any lighting information. This is just kind of generally, like, it's called an ambient lighting. Like, there's just ambience in the room that illuminates everything a little bit, just so we can see it. But there's not actually any real lighting information about which direction the lighting has come from. If I tumble around and render it from a different view, like, the highlights and everything still follow me, and like it just still looks the same, right? So we're going to put a couple of lights in here to get some of that information. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 7 to go to our lighting mode, right? And as we said, there's no lights in here at all. And then I'm going to go to Create Lights, and if I just select that little double line there, it'll break this tab off for me where I can make more lights if I want to. So I'm going to do a spotlight first. So I click Spotlight, and it created one, but it's kind of over here, we can't really see it. So I'm just going to move this up and sort of angle it down and look at what it does here. So a spotlight's going to work like a flashlight, right? There's this point of light that's casting out through this cone and making this circle of influence of the light. And if I move this around, I can change what we see. If I pull it back, the circle gets a little bit bigger, right? And if I want to aim it a little bit better, I can actually have the light selected, go to Panels, and Look Through selected, and you'll see that it actually lets me kind of navigate around as if I were the light and aim at the things I want to show, right? So I can set it up like this and be like, yeah, that's the area I want to illuminate. Now I can go back to my perspective camera, and we'll see that that's where the light stays. Now the light has a lot of different options though. I can also change the color of the light. If I wanted it to be, casting blue light, I could. I don't. I still want white light. And I can also change the intensity. I can make it really bright and wash everything out, or really dim and everything's just barely illuminated, right? Again, I'm going to leave that at 1. Down here a little lower though, we'll see that we have this cone angle, which will allow us to sort of spread that out a little bit, right? And we also have this penumbra angle. And so penumbra angle is going to kind of soften the edges of that, and so will drop off. Drop off will also help us kind of soften it. So a combination of these three is going to allow us to really, spread out how much of this shot we're illuminating, right? And so now if I hit render on this, you're going to see that, we get a little bit more decent lighting on that, right? Now something you will notice though is these shadows. They're just like pitch black dark, right? There's nothing in there that we can see, and that's not usually accurate. I mean, in this sort of scene, this is like shining a flashlight into the basement, and you just see these things. maybe, yeah, there are situations where you want that, but in most cases you want a little bit more illumination. So we're just going to pop in another little point light in here. And so let's look at what a point light looks like. It's just a dot, right? And that dot is casting light in all directions. And so it's just sort of a way to add a little light that will fill in those corners, right? And so if I render now, see, now it's almost too much. It's like there's two equal lights coming from each side, right? If I wanted to, I could go in here underneath my point light, under shadows, and you'll see that I have a couple of different types of shadows. I can use ray trace shadows, or I can use depth map shadows. So depth map shadows is turned off, ray trace shadows is turned on, and if I uncheck that, now I'm just not using shadows at all with my point light. And if I hit render, you'll see now I'm not getting that crazy shadow in the front, but it's still a little too bright overall. I'm just going to choose my point light, and I'm going to take its intensity down to like 0.3 or something. And that's just going to give me just enough light to kind of fill in those shadows a little bit so they're not crazy dark, right? Now if I wanted to, and I can move this around, sort of change the way the shadows are, and this is just going to give us a little preview of it. If I wanted to, I could also change the color to this a little bit. Maybe I wanted it to look like some of this green was bouncing off there. And so I could choose that green, maybe turn it down a little less green. Right. And so if we look at our previous image, it's this, save that, I'll render again. And now we get just a little bit of that light that's bouncing off of it's looking green instead of just white, right? Now, one of the things I'll say to notice is that now our render time is 3 seconds instead of 1 second, right? And that's not that bad, but as we move further along, our lighting is going to get more complex, our materials are going to get more complex, and that number is going to go up. The amount of time it takes to render one frame, will eventually be like in the minutes. Like you'll be taking 5 minutes to render a frame. And that doesn't seem that long for a single frame until you realize that an animation, like our timeline here, has 120 frames, right? That's, 5 times 120, that's a lot of minutes, right? And so you're going to get into 10 minutes a frame at 1,000 frames, and like your time to get a render done is going to start getting larger and larger and larger. So don't underestimate render time. Every semester this bites somebody. They're like, oh, I'll just run in right before class and finish rendering this out, and then they realize the render is going to take them 2 hours to finish. So don't be that person, even though I almost guarantee you it will happen again this semester. So just recognize that render times is something to be conscious of. So I show you all this. If you're working on the project for the Principles of Digital Animation class, the exercise or the project from here is to go on, take this lighting and texturing, and texture up your scene. Put some additional models in it, and finish up that project. And so if you have any questions, I did want to show you all one more thing. So all of this stuff, we're getting this render. You'll notice our render size is 960 by 540, and it's rendering from the perspective camera. And all, we just rendered frame 1. All of those things are in our render settings. So it's this little cog here. When I click that, it pops it up on the other screen here, and we can look at all of the different things that we have the option to change, which is a lot. Now we have Mental Ray set as our renderers. Maya software has its own kind of settings, but we'll leave it on Mental Ray. There are things we can change in here of what type of file it would save, which camera it'll render from. But the thing I'm going to look at right now is the presets. I want to set my presets a little higher, so at mine I would set it to 1080, right? And I also want to go to quality. Right now our quality is a little low. If you look at it, you'll see, like, if we zoom in here, you'll see a little bit of like jagginess, and some of that's just the resolution, but some of it's also like the anti-aliasing quality. And so if I go in here and set that to 1 on overall quality, then we're going to get a little bit of a better render. Okay, so now I can close that. I'll save this image. I'll render again. And you'll start to see where that render time comes in. And this is an HD image. This is 1080 HD. And you'll see that we're getting way better quality. Hopefully you can see that in the video, that we're getting way better quality in that render now. And some of it's just like the fact that it's just a higher resolution image now. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions, and keep up the good work.